This is Patrick Henry, the CEO of QuestFusion with The Real Deal, What Matters. I recently had a webinar about the building a business plan that gives you the best chances of getting your business funded. I'm going to release this video, which are excerpts from that webinar, to all my online viewers. This information is really based on my decades of experience of being an entrepreneur and startup CEO. It's really about working with other entrepreneurs, buying and selling companies, being an investor myself. Those are the things that I rely on and base my comments on. There are many teachers and coaches out there in cyberspace that are self-proclaimed experts around how to start and manage companies, but very few of them have actually run companies and been successful themselves. I have the credentials. I basically have run 3 different technology companies. I've taken a company public. I've raised over $200 million of equity capital for my companies, and had delivered significant return on investment for a number of investors in my companies, and as a result built some substantial personal wealth. I speak from your shoes, from the shoes of a startup CEO and from somebody that's been an entrepreneur myself. My whole goal here is to help be a guide for you to make your company more successful, and as a result, help you build personal wealth. So what questions will we answer today? The things that we're really going to focus on are what are the key components of a business plan. There's a lot of information out there in cyberspace around different business plan outlines. I'm going to focus a lot more on the content of what you really need to have in a killer business plan that grabs investor attention and helps you build credibility with investors. You need to know why someone should invest in you and your company, and it's absolutely essential that an entrepreneur understands that, especially in an early stage company, the investor is investing as much in you as an individual and your team as they are in your company and your idea. And what are some of the key things that early stage investors look for? Next, I want to talk about how to identify the best investors for your company, where they offer not just money, but they have potential strategic value beyond that. We typically call these smart money investors, where they have specific knowledge in the verticals that you're participating in. The timing of when you should approach investors based on where you're at in various cycles within your company, and what are some of the key milestones for getting fundability of your startup. And then we'll finalize it with a question and answer session. So a little bit about me and my experience. I've been in the technology business for over 25 years. If you look at what I've done most recently, I've run 3 different startup companies. I took my last company, Entropic, public in 2007. Started in 2003 when we were pre-product and pre-revenue. And now the company has recently been sold to another technology company here in San Diego. I have tons of experience negotiating complex mergers and acquisitions transactions, strategic partnerships, as well as large contracts with Fortune 100 companies. I'm a recognized and awarded CEO. I have a bachelor's in engineering and a master's in business administration from the University of Southern California. So a little bit about QuestFusion. We're focused on startups and emerging growth companies and entrepreneurs, specifically founding teams, startup CEOs. Our focus is to improve company performance through improved market and customer analysis, and helping the entrepreneur refine and better articulate their critical customer needs, the problem that they're solving, and the unique value proposition and way that they do that. And that leads to how they make money as a company. QuestFusion is in the process of building a set of tools and processes for online access for entrepreneurs and startup CEOs. This is my first webinar in a series. We'll be doing webinars once a month on the 3rd Thursday of every month with various different topics that are important to entrepreneurs. We provide information that no one else will ever tell you, either because they don't know it or they have a conflict of interest. There are many things that I've learned, especially over the last 15 years being a CEO of various different emerging growth and startup companies. And I'll reveal, many of the secrets that people won't tell you about in terms of running and building companies. I also do entrepreneur and startup CEO coaching, and I do some angel investing with selective companies where I feel like I can provide unique value and have a good understanding of the business. So let's get into it. The key components of a business plan. If you look online, there's a variety of different sources. I've just picked 3 here of outlines of what should be included in your business plan. As you can see, the U.S. Small Business Administration, Entrepreneur Magazine, and Forbes Magazine all have very similar outlines. This tells you a couple things. The first is that investors are used to getting information in a very consistent way. And my recommendation is, even if you're a highly innovative entrepreneur, save your innovation for your products and services, and do not try to innovate a new business plan outline. This is just going to hurt you, and it's going to be very confusing for potential investors, because they're used to getting information in a very specific way. I think the second thing is, although there's a ton of information out there in books, on the web, about what are the components of a business plan, there's very little information, at least that I found, about what the key content needs to be. There's outlines and content descriptions, but what I'm going to focus on today are what the content needs to be and how you develop that content to make it a killer business plan that actually is fundable, especially by early stage investors. So as Benjamin Franklin says, by failing to prepare, you're preparing to fail. I'm a big sports fanatic, love the NFL, and one thing I notice in post-game interviews is the winning team, whether it's a winning quarterback, winning coach, various different players, they talk about what a great week of preparation, what a great week of practice they've had. And that's really about running the plays and getting a good sense of how things work prior to being in real-time game situations. I think the other thing I always talk about is, we watched a lot of film. That's really about studying the competition. Both of those things are critically important, and those are the elements of preparing for the actual game. And then, of course, you have the game time execution that's also very important. So, purpose of the executive summary. First thing is, it's a summary, so you write it last. Because it's at the beginning of a business plan, I think a lot of very new entrepreneurs try to write it first, and it really doesn't work because it is a summary. You need to have the in-depth understanding of actually going through a strategic planning and business planning process, which we'll talk about in a bit, to write a really good executive summary. The exec summary is really designed to grab potential investor interest. It highlights the overall strengths of your business, explains where you're at today and where you're going, and it shows why your business idea will be successful. If you're developing a business that you plan to get funded by either angel investors or venture capitalists, you need to have a business model that has the potential to deliver a 10x return on investment. And we'll talk quite a bit of detail about that later in the webinar, but that's what you measure success by, is do you have a business that you can actually grow and create value at that level and return on investment at that level. The exec summary also demonstrates that you've done a thorough market analysis, which is critical. And thorough meaning not only that it's there, but you've done it with a critical eye, and you're not too overly optimistic or Pollyannish about your business opportunity, but at the same time still have a belief in it and are passionate about it. It also clearly explains the customer pain point, the problem that you're solving for customers, the unmet need, and your unique value proposition, and why you have a competitive advantage and a sustainable competitive advantage with the value proposition that you're offering. So one of the books that I really like, it's probably on my top 15 business books, and it's, I think, a really good read, especially for entrepreneurs, is called The Innovator's Dilemma by Clayton Christensen. This is something I would definitely recommend anybody that's interested in entrepreneurship reading. It gives a lot of good ideas about delivering disruptive innovation in established businesses and why the incumbents in the business are unable to innovate at a breakthrough level. All they can really do is incremental innovation because they're so busy servicing the existing customers. They're obviously completely out of the box ideas. Things like when Netscape first developed the first web browser, that was a business and an idea that really didn't exist at all. But most startup ideas are basically entering established businesses, but doing that business in a completely different way, or at least a way that provides the potential for a 10x improvement in performance and therefore a 10x improvement in return on investment. Key elements of the executive summary, a mission statement. This is really a description of your idea, what's your business all about. This is typically several sentences to a paragraph. Information about your company, when your business was founded, the names and roles of the founders, the key employees, number of employees, business locations, growth highlights. If you're pre-revenue and pre-product, there's still an opportunity to talk about growth in terms of the market and target markets that you have. As much of this information as you can make graphical and visual, that's extremely helpful. As I say, a picture is worth 1,000 words. And if you have a combination of good pictures and graphics, that sometimes make things a lot easier for investors to understand. It should also include a brief description of your product and services, features and benefits, financial information, especially if you're seeking financing, any information about your current financial statements, your current bank and investors, a cap table if you're planning on raising equity capital, and finally a summary of your future plans. What are the goals for the business? Where do you want to take it over the next year, the next 3 years? And if you are planning to raise money, a funding request. So in the company description, what should you have there other than just the facts that we talked about in the executive summary? This is really your opportunity to give your best, very clear, very concise commercial about the company. And this is typically called an elevator pitch. So the company description is really an extended elevator pitch. And for those of you that aren't familiar with this term or haven't heard it before, basically this says that you're taking a ride up an elevator, which could be 30 seconds to 2 minutes, and you need to clearly describe what your company does, how you're going to win in your target market, some of your specific customers, and your competitive advantage of your products versus the alternatives in the business, and the competitive advantages of your company, what you provide that's different. The company description in a business plan can be a little bit longer than that, but it really shouldn't take more than 3 to 4 minutes to read. And that really gives you, as a reader, as a potential investor, the key highlights of the company. So what I call elevator pitch basics, in order to be really good at delivering an elevator pitch about your company, you have to have done the homework, which means you have to have done a strategic plan and a business plan. And really think about your target audience and how they're going to hear this. In my prior businesses, my most recent company, Entropic Communications, we had customers that built consumer electronics boxes that go in your home next to your TV set. But they also had customers that we had direct interaction with, the pay TV service providers like DirecTV and Comcast and Time Warner and Dish Network. The way that I would talk to a pay TV service provider would be different than how I would talk to a box manufacturer, which would be different than how I talk to a supplier and the language that I would use. And if you're talking to a purely financial investor, you tailor how you're saying and what you're saying to that audience because they may have a different basis of knowledge that they're operating from. The elevator pitch should be the basis for that, but you also have to keep in mind your target audience. Once you have this down, you need to learn it, memorize it, practice it, and speak with authority and speak with passion. Nobody's going to be interested in you or your company unless you're excited about it. I've met a number of entrepreneurs throughout the years and company CEOs, and they're down in the mouth and really sad, and it's like, I'm trying to raise money, and I'm like, wow, I don't know that anybody is ever going to give you $1 with how you feel about how things are. You need to be able to be passionate about what you're doing and be ready to turn it on at any time. You never know when you're going to run into a prospective customer, a prospective investor, a prospective client, or somebody that can make an introduction for you. So once you've delivered your pitch, which again lasts 30 seconds, 2 minutes, be ready to listen, be ready to be receptive, and be ready to answer questions. I think that if you've done a good job, that's going to happen, and you're going to get people that are interested in what you're doing and possibly even investing in what you're doing. Next thing I want to talk about is strategic planning. This is really the essence of any business plan that you're going to develop. This is just an outline of something I've developed over the last 15 years, really refined it a lot the first 5 or 6 years, and it's been pretty static since then. And I'll just kind of walk through this flow chart for you and explain what these different parts are all about. The situation analysis is the first thing you do in any strategic planning process, and that's really what I like to call kind of a topographical map of the market and competitive landscape that you're pursuing, and it's kind of a snapshot of the existing situation and where you're at today relative to the other things that are going on in the industry. You typically have a set of financial goals. You want to grow your business by so much over the next year, by so much over the next 3 years, and the amount of capital, the amount of money it's going to take to get from point A to point B and from point B to point C. That really says, okay, ultimately I want to be at point C, and that's the winner solution. Where I want to be in 3 years, in my experience, it's very difficult to do strategic planning beyond 3 years. We used to do 5-year planning when I was with semiconductor manufacturers that actually built their own factories, because for capacity planning you had to do 5-year planning, but it was truly just a shot in the dark, and even 3-year planning is somewhat difficult. But at least in a 3-year horizon, especially if you're developing new products that take a year to 2 to develop, you have to look out that far, and this really gives you a pretty good perspective of the direction and trajectory you need to move in. The gap analysis is really just the difference between the situation analysis, point A, and point B or point C, which is the winner solution, and what path do you have to take to get there. The gap resolution, this is your roadmap, your plan of how you get from one point to the next point, and that ultimately leads to your strategic plan. So the analogy that I like to use is you're going shopping at the mall, and you want to go to Macy's, but there's no parking over in that part of the mall, so you walk into a different entrance, and you typically look for one of these maps like this that says, this is a map of the mall, and on this one it has the star. Sometimes it has a big red dot that says you are here. That's basically the situation analysis. This is where we're currently at, this is where we're going. We have a plan to go to Macy's, so we need to know what stores we need to pass, what it looks like along the way, and that's the strategic plan. So it's not a super complicated thing, but it does take detailed analysis, and we'll talk about some of the things that make up a really good strategic plan. As Yogi Berra says, if you don't know where you're going, you'll end up someplace else. And that's definitely been the experience of a lot of people that I know. Market analysis. This is the next component of any good strategic plan and business plan. This really includes an industry description and outlook, the size of the primary target markets you're going after, the market share that you would like to get in that market, your pricing and gross margin targets, competitive analysis, and if you're in a business that requires, say, FDA approval or FCC approval, what are some of the regulatory restrictions around this? In my experience, the best companies don't say, okay, I've got a $5 billion market that I'm going after, and I'm going to get 2% market share. They try to go after a market that's a size sufficient for them to gain, a dominant market share, whether it's, starting at 100% and ultimately being at, say, 60% in a high growth business. Those are the leaders. Those are the companies that make money, are the market leaders. So you need to carve out a niche, big enough niche that is big enough and interesting, but a small enough niche that you can dominate as a startup. Next part of it is the competitive analysis. Really, this takes a look at if you're entering a new market and there is no competition. There typically exists, substitute competition. There's some kind of competitors in the market, unless, as I mentioned, you're like Netscape and the market doesn't exist at all. Even in the case of Entropic, when there was no market for multi-room DVR, and there was no home networking technology that delivered, video delivery room to room throughout the house, we looked at what the ways people were doing it today. And there were, if they wanted a multi-room DVR, they'd have a DVR in each room of the house. But that didn't solve the real problem. All the stored movies and TV programs that were in the living room, you couldn't watch them in your master bedroom. And things wouldn't sync up. So we were addressing a market that didn't exist, but where there was a substitute alternative that was more expensive, more difficult to deploy, and where our technology provided a significant value proposition. Next thing you look at is the strengths and weaknesses of your competitors. How can you, kind of avoid their strengths and exploit their weaknesses? How important is the market that you're going after to those competitors? Is it a big part of their overall business, or is it a tiny part of their business? If it's a tiny part, it might be easy for you to go after. If it's tiny and it's growing fast, those are the especially exciting market opportunities that you can really build a good company around. Is there a window of opportunity to enter the market? In other words, if you wait another 2 years, are there going to be a lot of other people going after it and you have a good idea that you need to exploit quickly? What are the substitute technologies for what you're doing? In the case of the Entropic technology, we had a home networking technology called Mocha, which used the in-home cable TV cables for a high-performance network for streaming video over to the various TVs in the home. This ended up being the de facto industry standard over about a 5-year period. It's in tens of millions of homes today. But when we're getting started out, the substitutes for this were put DVRs in every room, or maybe it's going to be Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi is going to be used to stream video throughout the house, or maybe it's going to be power line technologies, or maybe it's going to be phone line technologies. So you really have to understand what the substitutes are and the strengths and weaknesses of those various alternatives. What are the barriers to market entry and exit? Is it a market that's really easy to get into and hard to get out of? Those aren't really great markets to be in because they end up being super crowded, and competitive forces are really, really tough. So the two tools that I use, in strategic planning, which ultimately leads to having a very good market analysis and competitive analysis in your business plan, are both from Michael Porter. He's a Harvard Business School professor. He's written many books now, but these two books I think are especially instructive for anybody running a business, but especially entrepreneurs. The first business model is called the Porter 5 Forces model, sometimes called industry structural analysis. I think this is a great way to look at the market forces and especially competition within a market. The second thing that I think is a great tool for strategic planning is in his book Competitive Advantage, and this is called the value chain. This is really about how you make gross margins, how you make operating margins based on the various different parts of your business. So this is kind of looking at your company specifically, whereas the 5 Forces model looks at things from a more industry standpoint. Both great books, but the essence of both books is really these two tools. Next thing that's in your business plan is a description of your service or the product line. This is a more detailed description than what you had in the executive summary. Really focuses on the features and benefits that your product has and the stage of development, where you're at in the product life cycle, what factors influence the product life cycle. Do you have intellectual property in your product or service, and how are you protecting that? Is it through patents or copyrights or trade secrets? Do you have the right kind of legal documents in place, non-disclosure agreements with partners, non-compete agreements with certain employees? Do you have employment agreements in place so that your employees can't take stuff that they develop at your company to other companies? A description of your research and development activities, including how much money do you need to invest relative to competition to get to where you ultimately want to get to. And then a brief description of your product roadmap. In my experience, the companies that do the best job of really clearly articulating what problem they're solving and how they're doing it in a differentiated way, that they have a sustainable competitive advantage, those are the ones that are really good. The competitive landscape that's outlined and the market landscape that's outlined is kind of the road that you're driving on, and this is the car itself. So if you don't have a good understanding of your environment, it's very difficult to say why your product is going to be successful. But all three of these components lined up together, a business plan holds together very well. For those of you not familiar with product life cycles, this is a product life cycle curve. You might make most of your money in a product life cycle during the growth and maturity phase. Most early stage startups are pre-product introduction. There are some companies that have bootstrapped themselves, used the founder's own money to actually introduce a product, and now they're looking for growth capital. It's important that the potential investors understand where you're at in this cycle, because obviously the closer you are to the growth and further away from maturity, the more opportunity there is to make money for a prospective investor. A great book on the product life cycle and some of the challenges for innovative technology companies is Crossing the Chasm by Jeffrey Moore. The big focus of this book is how you make the transition from the early adopter stage of a market to the mass market. And again, great book for anyone in business, but especially for entrepreneurs. Other sections of the business plan, you need to have a description of your organization and management. This is really just about your organization structure, but also a description of your team. It's really important that there's a clear description of who the players are on the team. If you want to go to the Super Bowl, if you want to win the Super Bowl, you have to have a world-class team and world-class coaching around that. And this is your opportunity to really highlight your skills and expertise and the skills of the other key members of your management team and your key employees. You have to have a sales and marketing strategy. How do you go to market? Are you going from business to business, or is it a business to consumer play? Are you using market channels? Are you using distributors? Are you using value-added resellers? How does your sales force get paid? All those things are important to build up the overall business model, which is then translated into your financial projections. Financial projections are really, anybody can do it, anybody can build a spreadsheet. So if your financial projections aren't based in some form of market and competitive analysis, it's really pretty worthless. But if you've done all the other previous steps, this is the information that a prospective investor is going to rely on and also measure you by in order making any investment in your company. And then if you are raising money, having a specific funding request. Are you trying to raise debt capital? Are you trying to raise equity capital? What are you trying to do? What are the terms that you're offering? And that's where the negotiation begins, assuming that there's an interest in investing in your company. What investors need to know in order to make an intelligent decision about investing in your company. They need to understand your idea. They need to understand the problem being solved, your solution to solving that problem, and the value of doing that. And the value is typically based on how is it being done today, and you need to really decide, hey, this is how I'm going to make money, this is how I'm going to be able to change the world. They need to understand the market opportunity. How big is the market? What's the competitive advantage you have? How crowded is this space? Are there a lot of other competitors going after it? and what's your basic product roadmap. I meet with a lot of startups and entrepreneurs in my business. There's many that don't have very good ideas that you could never fund, and there's not much you can do to create or improve that idea. Others have brilliant ideas, but they need to build the right team around it. Some have a great idea and a great team, but they just don't have the ability to articulate the value proposition in a way that potential investors can understand it. All of these are problems. Some of them are unsolvable problems, but if you do have a good business and a good team, and it's a matter of translating that, that's something that I do, and there's other professionals that do that. People that operate as Sherpas or guides to entrepreneurs that maybe they have a tremendous business prospect, but they don't have the experience of going through this process of building a business plan that holds together, that can be clearly articulated to prospective investors and get you on your way. A Harvard Business School study looked at startups, and there's over 50 million new companies started every year right now. 75% of those startups fail because they don't have an ability to raise money to grow their companies. So this is obviously a big deal. Next thing is your business model. How do you make money? That's critically important because you have to make money in order to grow your company, and you have to make money in order to eventually have an exit strategy to be able to sell your company or take it public. The unique qualifications of your team, the financial synopsis, and how you're going to use the funds that you're raising. Are you going to be using it for product development? Are you going to be using it for working capital? Are you going to be using it for growth capital, open up new market channels? Any investor is going to want to know kind of what your plans are if they're thinking about writing you a check. And what are you asking? Don't be shy, don't be afraid. If you've done a good job at the business planning, you don't need to be afraid to ask for money. And you're really trying to help your prospective investors make money more than like taking their money. This is an investment, this is not a gift, and that's the way that you have to treat it as an owner of a business. The big secret, everything else is about you. If I'm making an early stage investment or any sophisticated investor, you have to be selling yourself as much as anything else. Two more quotes that I like. Abraham Lincoln, give me 6 hours to chop down a tree and I'll spend the first 4 sharpening the axe. The importance of planning really can't be overemphasized. I think that, and it's not only about the strategic plan and the business plan that is the end result of the planning, but the process itself. Starting companies, for the most part, especially ones that you're eventually going to monetize through a sale, which are the ones I'm talking to today, they're team sports. You need to build a great team, and you need to make sure the team is working well together. If you have incredible people, the analogy I like to use is, you're basically on a rowing crew type of boat, and if everybody is paddling in different directions, the boat goes in circles. You need to get everybody synced in, everybody in the boat, everybody rowing in the same direction. And the strategic planning process is a good way to provide that kind of alignment and make sure there's buy-in across the organization with the key people. Beyond that, you can't plow a field simply by turning it over in your mind. You actually have to do the work. The planning work is essential, but then just as important is game management, game execution as game planning. And don't underestimate the importance of hard work and stick-to-itiveness and executing on the plan. This is Patrick Henry, the CEO of QuestFusion, with The Real Deal, What Matters.